Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on for the first time, Nathan Jenkins. He has a PhD in exercise physiology, postdoc in vascular physiology and type 2 diabetes. He was a professor of kinesiology for 9 years at the University of Georgia, and he has his CrossFit level 2 cert. Nathan, thanks for coming on, man. Really looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here. Thanks for that intro. You've done
Yeah,
your homework.
yep, absolutely. I
Yeah.
first came across you on, I think you were on the Barbell Shrugged podcast.
Yeah.
I just saw it pop up and I saw the topics. I thought it was super interesting. And then I was like, man, this guy's super smart. And your dad as well, too. I'm a new dad, so always
Oh,
enjoy chatting
congrats,
with
man.
other. Yep, thanks. On that, how many kids do you have?
Just the one.
Just
My
one.
son
Okay.
Camden. Yeah, he'll be 3 at the end of on March 31st.
Hey, man, one's enough.
Yeah. How about you, man?
Just one. We had our first one back in September.
Oh,
It's
okay. You got a baby.
Yeah, it's been
It's exciting.
interesting. Yep,
Yeah,
love them,
6 months or so. Yeah.
love them, but it's an adjustment period.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Fucking everything is different. Better, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. This could easily turn into a dad's podcast as far as I'm concerned. Yeah,
Well,
it's the best, man. I love it.
Well,
Congratulations to you guys.
thank you. For me, the big thing was like just the prioritization, right? You have to prioritize like what's most important. Before we had the baby, someone was like, man, you won't realize how much like downtime you have until you have a kid. And then you look back and you're like, man, I had so much extra time to do stuff. And then you're like, yep, that definitely is the case.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like every second in terms of how you prioritize and you move into, I think of it as like a different forms of defense mode almost. Everything revolves around when they're real young. And I think you're still at 6 months, you're out of the super like newborn phase, but still obviously completely dependent. You're still like around the clock. The sleep thing is probably not totally dialed in yet at 6 months. It's probably getting better, but you just kind of pivot each day, like, all right, what do I need to do in this time window that I have now, like during nap time, or you and your wife, I'm sure, like take turns doing stuff, and you just figure it out, man. You just figure it out, and that's my sense. Now I'm 3 years into it, but my sense is like that element of it is a constant. It just changes form. I've got real close friends that are my neighbors. They've got four, ranging from 9 to 4 years old, and a couple twins there in the middle.
Man.
Yeah, and they're again that season of like sports and just different activities, and they're just always like, all right, what do we got to do today to like get the kids where they need to be and on time, and like it's just all you're just always once from the day they're born until the day they leave your house, I guess it is, you're just pivoting in some way to prioritize that all important job. But and I work with a lot of clients. We can maybe talk about fitness a little bit. I work with a lot of clients where I have conversations with you got all these other priorities that are important, right? Taking care of yourself, eating well, some semblance of a social life. Usually this phase is with other parents or your people that you work out with. But anyway, yeah, all that stuff's super important too.
And it's tough because I think from a exercise standpoint, but almost what is the balance there? Because at the end of the day, we do want to do that just for how we feel as
Mhm.
well too, right? So that balance is super hard, and it's like figuring that out's been a challenge. Luckily my wife's great and I've been able to get in most of my workouts, but it's definitely I have to be a little bit more efficient in them, a little bit quicker.
Yeah,
And there's
yeah,
been a few days where in the past I'm like I would get it in and I had to miss that day
yeah.
there.
Yeah, oh, sure. Miss a day here and there, and you got to be efficient when you do it. Not as much time. Like for me, my biggest thing is we're in the daycare drop-off phase. So like a lot of times, the mornings are just super hectic. Getting out the door, getting him to where he needs to be, and then I crash into the gym. It's me and all my mom friends at 8:30 in the morning. But the funny joke is I should always show up for about the 8:34 to 8:36 class. So yeah, everything's just go all the time at that hour. But I think it's super important. Like one thing I tell, it's really easy, just like with anything new. I've done it in the past with like job stuff. When you go all in on something that's new, and I see this a lot of times with parents, like they completely pour themselves into that or into the new thing and neglects their health and their
Yep.
fitness and their bodies and all that stuff. And I think you definitely don't want to do that as a new parent, because for me, the way I think of it is the better within reason, within some significant constraints, the better I can take care of myself, the better dad I'm going to be. Right. And it's something that's on my mind a lot. I was 39 when my son was born. I'll be 42 this May. And so that's old for death. And I think about 10, 20 years from now, like I like the scenario that I always tell, the future story I like to tell is like when he's moving into his dorm or apartment, like in college, and we got to move a washing machine up 3 flights of stairs and there's no elevator. I don't want there's not going to be some other dad that's going to help my son do that. Or I want to be able, his roommates could help him, but I could probably help him better if I take care of myself. So that's like the long range vision. Yeah. And then everything in between, man. Like now, the fitter I am, the better I can participate. In the summertime, I want to be in the pool with him.
Yep.
This past weekend, we spent an hour or so on the neighbor's trampoline. I'm like on the thing with him, climbing up and down. I know a lot of people like my age, and they just either don't want to or cannot do that kind of stuff, man. And that's a huge deal for me, is to be able to there's a certain like physicality of parenting to really fully experience it.
Yeah.
We get into sports and all that kind of stuff. So I don't want the fact that I'm a little bit older to limit me in that regard. So that's something that's like hugely important to me.
And two, it's demanding. It takes a lot out of you to take care of a child as well too. And I feel like if the worst kind of shape you're in, the more that's going to impact you, and it's just going to trickle
Yep.
down to really everything else you do. So that's going to allow you to be able to, like you said, be a better parent and just not be as fatigued and it affect you as much.
Yeah. And then think about the older age too. People I can just say very close family members who are older generation that just because of their health physically cannot travel. And when you got grandkids that live 2 hours away, the 2 hours might as well be on the other side of the world because they just can't do it. And so that's to me, that's like the worst case scenario. And then on the other hand, I've got again neighbors and friends whose parents, so I guess it's the grandparents of the family that come from an hour and a half, 2 hours away all the time. They're here like every week to help out, and they get to be in there with their grandkids. It's completely related to their physical health, and to the extent that you either have or have not taken care of that for your lifetime. Yeah, man, to me, that's where does fitness fit in the grand scheme of things. To zoom out on this a little bit, that's where it is. Your ability, it's directly related to the ability to participate and therefore enjoy or not life for the long term. And I see that, I don't think anywhere better than in the scenario of like kids and then like future grandkids and all that good stuff. Why should a new parent not neglect their fitness? That's the last 5 minutes. I look like mini lecture on that. So
Yeah, and it's
uh,
tough. I feel like it's super easy to let that go and everything like that during that time too. But as you said there, it's not only now, but in the future as well too. It's going to be super helpful.
Yep.
Like I said, all fair, man. It's all the conversations always just flow and don't have an idea, but it's always going to go and certain whenever something comes up. But real quick, if anyone isn't like super familiar with you, maybe you want
Sure.
to give a short kind of background, like how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, man, you covered it in a really nice Cliff Notes version. So my background is in exercise physiology world. I was in the academic space for a long time. My undergraduate and master's degrees are in exercise science, exercise physiology, PhD, also exercise physiology, but also then I started to get into a focus on cardiovascular physiology, and cardiovascular health. Postdoc focused on still exercise and health to a large degree. Got into kind of a specialty of type 2 diabetes, both from the metabolic side and also really always interested in vascular health, so like the vascular consequences of type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance and that kind of stuff. So that was the totality of my training. Got hired. So my as far as like location of all this, I was at University of Georgia for undergrad and master's. Went to Maryland for my doctorate, and then Missouri for my postdoc, and then got hired back home at UGA in Athens, Georgia. So like from my home department, became a professor there. So that was really cool and unexpected. I wasn't really ever thinking that I would be able to do that. That was super cool because my family's kind of all in this general area too, the general Atlanta, greater Atlanta area. If you can say that Athens is part of that, we're about an hour and a half, 2 hours away. But in any case, reasonably close to family. And then stayed at UGA for, like you said, it's almost a decade, 9 years it was. And yeah, ran a lab focused on a few different things, but mainly exercise-induced signals for vascular and metabolic adaptation for the most part. And then somewhere along the way, I got into, on a personal level, got into CrossFit. Yeah, so this was like circa 2015 or so. It'll be 10 years this year. I've been doing CrossFit. And that very much, as people do when they start CrossFit, when you're drinking the Kool-Aid and you get super enthusiastic about it, it tends to infiltrate everything in your life. And so we did do a few CrossFit themed research experiments in the lab there, quite a few, especially towards from like 2017 onward. And then the other thing that's relevant for to answer your question of how I got to where I am now, no longer working at the university. I started nutrition coaching with a company called RP Strength in 2017, 2018, it must have been. And then did that kind of, I just it was on the side. If I was say it was like a hobby when it started, something to do instead of watch TV in the evenings. Literally, like the story I always tell, I was in the middle of watching Game of Thrones, and then I started coaching clients, and instead of I never finished the series. I can't remember what season it was, probably season 4 or 5 that I stopped watching it. And people were like, yeah, you should probably finish that one. But then it got bad towards the end. But anyway, like I just literally replaced that kind of, it was maybe 5 to 10 clients at first, just a side thing. And then gradually demand kept going up and I enjoyed it. It was fun. It was like a good hobby, but also like it was pretty good money. It's nice when those two things go together, right?
Yeah.
That's how it was for probably that first year or so. And then eventually got to the point after a couple of years where I was like, as far as like income and time spent and energy spent on the two jobs, the university and then the side gig, right? they were like equal for a while. And then at some point of my wife at the time we found out we were expecting. And it's okay, this is freaking awesome. How exciting. But I can't keep doing this thing where I've got two full-time jobs and have a newborn. Right. And so
Yeah.
it made looking at all the factors, the numbers as far as the finances of it all, and also in the numbers in terms of how I was spending my time and the autonomy that the coaching gave, decided to walk away from my tenured academic position and go all in on coaching. And yeah, so it's been like 3 years now that made that transition. And then lastly, I'll finally finish the story here in a second. In the last year or so, it'll be a year in April, that I've also been working with Rapid. That's how you came across me. I was on their podcast, Barbell Shrugged. I've been doing some consulting work with them, and that's now transitioning to a much larger role. We can talk about that if you want.
Yeah.
But the first thing I did with them, so their model is super interesting, where the clients get assessed at intake. It's like a 2-month process. They get assessed on multiple things, performance metrics like strength, VO2 max, some endurance measures. We look at their body composition, sleep. There's a whole sleep analysis that's done, training history, like what you've been doing as far as like your workout routine, and nutrition. So it's not just nutrition, it's like a bunch of different things. And so part of what I was doing up until about November, December for them was to assess all of that. That's all what we call the visible side. And the analysis is on the visible stressors of things that you can actually tangibly see, and then address any deficiencies or pull those levers if needed to optimize the client's physiological potential. There's also the hidden side, and that's what I'm doing now. So the hidden side is looking at, so clients will go through a whole panel or multiple panels of labs, blood work, stool, saliva, and urine. I've been in training since about November and got fully released to do this more or less autonomously, although still with significant feedback and review by my supervisor, Dan Garner, one of the founders of the company. If you're familiar with him, I see you nodding. Brilliant dude. He's basically been training me to take over that role. That's what he's been doing since the company was founded. Yeah, I'm the labs analyst in so many words for Rapid now. That's the story, man, from the beginning
With
to like last 12 years or so.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I have a lot of questions out of it, but real quick,
Sure.
since we just talked about it, with rap, is that like Gen Pop or athletes or all the above, or
It started with athletes, and there's still quite a bit of focus on that. So Dan and Andy Galpin are the two intellectual forces behind the whole thing. The origin of the program that is now offered to clients is with the elite athletes that they've been coaching for years, and they've been expanding that to a more general audience, in the sense of, yeah, anybody that can afford it can get access to the program, to the coaching, to the platform and the services offered. It is not for the general population, in the sense that it is in a really significant price point. I don't really want to say exactly on all that right now, because I'm not sure. If you're interested in it, go to rapidhealthoptimization.com, and there's a whole like questionnaire to fill out. But essentially, think of it as like a high ticket luxury coaching service. It's a very high price, but also extremely high touch and very comprehensive coaching program. And I'm not coaching clients directly through, but we have a whole team of coaches. And so each new client gets matched with a coach, and the coach gets input from, I'm one of multiple subject matter experts that the coach gets input from at the beginning of the program. And then the coach guides them step by step through like an 8-month protocol, essentially, to address the biggest stressors that were identified, both the visible and the hidden, that I talked about a minute ago.
and you're looking at like their labs. Is that what you're
Yep.
saying? You look at their labs, and then what you suggest like supplementation.
A lot of it does come down to supplementations. It's like a big part of my deliverable is the supplementation protocol. So for example, if we see it all the time, the biggest ones that I see all the time, just kind of some patterns. I'm still relatively new in this role, but the patterns are, most everybody's low in magnesium and vitamin D and zinc. So some of the really critical micronutrients. And if you look into the literature on some of these things, man, they're really fucking critical for whatever it is you care about.
Yep.
Whether it's your performance, your recovery, your sleep. Almost everybody sleeps like shit too. And anyway, like those, so that's a good example of the real simple, basic things, like get on a decent multivitamin, probably supplement with some magnesium, and bump up the vitamin D as well. And there's more to it for sure, but that kind of thing. And then also there, I will make, as part of the report, nutrition recommendations. Not like the clients do get macros and like meal plans. We have a nutrition person or a couple of nutrition professionals that are doing that. But I will, from the lab side, I will include some lab-based foods to include that are also incorporated with the macro plan that they're following, and so forth. So if somebody, I don't know, yeah, there's just basically fill it in whatever the deficiency is, or what the needs are. I'll just list a few different foods to in different categories to say, hey, maybe emphasize these. Low in omega-3s, each of that 3 servings of salmon a week, something like that.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I figure, especially with athletes too, but like you said, even Gen Pop, I'm sure magnesium is definitely a big one that's
Dude,
usually pretty low.
yeah, yeah. It's, and at the very least, if it's not like a legit deficiency, it's almost always suboptimal unless someone's actively supplementing with it. And it's amazing how much stuff like getting magnesium levels up can unlock significant potential. Just for example, there's one graph that I always show in these. So one of the things that the main deliverable is usually it's about an hour long video to the client discussing what I found in their lab work. And whenever anybody's low on magnesium, I'll pull up this one experiment. It was done in rats, but it shows, I still think it's relevant. What it shows is when normal rats, they weren't like deficient in magnesium, but just having normal rat levels of magnesium, give them a supplement to increase their magnesium to what we would consider to be more optimal concentrations in the blood. Their ability to take glucose out of the circulation and then get it into the working muscle, use it for fuel during exercise, literally doubles. So magnesium is a critical cofactor in multiple steps in glucose metabolism and also glucose uptake. And just by increasing magnesium concentrations in the blood, we're better able to use glucose for the thing that it's really intended for, what it's needed for, which is, again, energy production, energy supply during exercise. And where I really link that into, it depends on the client. Like maybe they're most interested in performance. That's going to, like endurance performance in particular, the better you are able to use the fuel. Basically, think about you get better gas mileage in if it's a car, you get better gas mileage in your body and your system. And then where also it comes up a lot, people come back and we don't do medical stuff. That's not our scope. That's not our zone. But at the same time, we see somebody that's coming in with relatively high HbA1c levels. If they're in the pre-diabetic range for their hemoglobin A1c or glucose, fasting glucose is a little bit elevated. And a lot of times these people are like already pretty health aware. They're eating well. They're training consistently. They're a little bit low in magnesium and their glucose is high. What the heck's going on? If we can increase your magnesium, your cellular magnesium levels by supplementation, then we can unlock your muscle's ability to utilize that glucose. And that could have, and probably will have, it's reasonable to make a hypothesis for this individual client that their glucose levels will come down to a healthier range just by being better able to use it during exercise, if that makes sense. A little physiology this morning on your show.
Hey, that's what we brought you on.
Yeah, yeah. But just given the example of, again, a really common issue deficiency that we see, that I think basically the takeaway for this, for your listeners would be, for one thing, everybody should be getting labs done annually. But take a look at your magnesium levels, and even if it's like in the normal healthy range, but the best thing to look at is actually RBC magnesium. That's magnesium in the red blood cell, and that may take like a special request to get it. That's part of what I think DHA is the company that we use for labs. It's something that's not commonly done at like an annual lab work, but it certainly is possible, something to look into. But specifically RBC, red blood cell magnesium, it's the magnesium in the red cell, and the number that we're looking for there is above 6. Normal is something like 4 to 6.5 or something like that, but like through a ton of work that Dan Garner's done, and he's gone millions of podcasts talking about. He talks about this on Barbell Shrugged all the time. Get magnesium to that optimal range of 6 to 6.8. That's really where we start to unlock people's true potential for multiple physiological processes. I'm just talking about one of the ones I'm most interested in, familiar with, comfortable with talking about, which is like glucose control and both glucose control from a health standpoint, preventing abnormalities in blood glucose, for example, pre-diabetes and ultimately type 2 diabetes, and also performance. Again, if anybody's somewhat interested in athletic performance, needs to be able to use glucose for fuel in the most efficient way. And so looking at some of these micronutrients, again, like magnesium, that's one of those things where that's certainly a lever we can pull to help somebody to elevate them.
And it's just such a like low hanging fruit thing as well,
Yep.
too. That's simple, right? It's not like you have to do anything crazy for it. And
Yeah.
obviously high blood sugar and, like you said, high A1C, everything, that's an issue that a lot of people are dealing with. And it's, again, obviously we want to take care of the lifestyle stuff, but that's just a simple thing that you can do. And like you said, most people are deficient in it. And even people that, from my understanding, are healthy, eat a good diet, still probably aren't getting enough anyways. And so my understanding too, magnesium is obviously the more active you are, the more stress you have to, it will deplete a little bit more in that kind of avatar.
Absolutely. Yeah, stress is another big one that we see a lot, and we see like elevations in cortisol, particularly cortisol throughout the day. There's something called the cortisol. Cortisol is one adrenal hormone. Another one that's not as talked about as much, but it's like if you think of a yin and yang scenario, DHEA. DHEA sulfate is if cortisol is the ultimate like catabolic hormone, breaks things down, DHEA is the ultimate anabolic or build things up in the body. Hormone is a precursor to both testosterone and estrogen. And it's one of the most sort of anabolic factors in the entire body. And so the ratio of those two, cortisol to DHEA, is something that we look at is really important. And so when that is out of balance and there's excess cortisol relative to the DHEA concentration, that's an indicator of systemic stress and chronic stress. And then linking that back to the magnesium thing, we see those two in parallel with each other. This is the cool thing too, because physiology is all about connections between things. So you get this ratio that's basically a chronic stress marker and low magnesium. Low magnesium creates a situation of being susceptible to the negative effects of stress. So like systemic inflammation and that sort of thing. And then that stress can then further lower the magnesium. Like I think that's what you were like, stress is in itself something that will deplete magnesium. And so it is like a vicious cycle. And so and I don't touch this as much, especially my new role, some in the role I was talking about before, where I would look at the visible side of the overall physiological burden and so forth. I don't really look at stress that much now in terms of like stress management and people, yeah, example, we're working all day and then having dinner with your family, the family goes back to bed, and then you work all night till 11:30, and then going straight from your laptop, like we are like right now, then going and cranking out a few more emails or whatever it is, and then going straight to bed with no down regulation protocol of any sort, and then sleeping like shit, and then getting up at 4 in the morning to train. I can see that in client protocols. Gosh, we need to intervene on that really. But even there is a thing though, where even if that doesn't change, real simple, man, just start supplementing a little bit with some actual decent stuff, like getting these micronutrients shored up a bit, like just from supplementation. That can do something to make the body a bit more resilient. So get that if magnesium's low and you're in this state of chronic stress, if we can at least just have somebody take a little bit of magnesium, it's definitely not going to solve the issue. It's definitely not going to make you so resilient such that you aren't going to completely burn out or cause dysfunction and distress. And there is certainly are diseases linked to like chronic unrelenting stress, right? Without changing that cycle of I guess, its behavior and choice of how people spend their time and so forth, and how they manage the stress from a mental health standpoint. But if there are things that we can do to make the body a bit more resilient to that sort of thing. And that's something that we talk a lot about is like resiliency. So yeah, and it turns out as complicated as the physiology is in execution, it's unbelievably simple. You just remember to take your pills. Maybe get one of those. And I actually have one like those pill jars, the pill organizers, like labeled Monday through one for every day of the week and in the morning, evening, and so forth. And just a matter of it's after this call, it'll be lunchtime and take my lunchtime supplements. It's just super easy to do. So
with magnesium, what kind do you typically recommend? Just because I know that someone's going to see there's a ton of different types of magnesium.
yeah, you want the go-to is magnesium bisglycinate. It's a glycinated form. And the reason that's this, you actually get a double whammy. You get 2 for 1 with that one. That glycinated form is more bioavailable. It is more easily passed through, for example, through the blood-brain barrier to get into the brain. It's more easily just delivered to the body's tissues that way. And then two, that glycine is a precursor to something called glutathione. And glutathione is one of the most important antioxidant defense mechanisms in your body. So that's another thing we see a lot of people come in with. That's one of the markers that we look at is if glutathione is low, then there's other things we can do. N-acetylcysteine is a supplement that we'll recommend in that scenario because that's a precursor to glutathione as well. But with that glycinated form of magnesium, you get that as well. Yep, that's the kind that we recommend.
Yeah, that's the kind I'll recommend. One that I've seen a little bit more about lately is 3 and 8. Is that one that you'll ever recommend in any form or fashion? Or
Yeah, that actually is one that we do at times, and that one actually, in particular, is the best one for passing through the blood-brain barrier.
okay.
Yeah, that's the if somebody is, and sometimes we'll do both, take one of each or like one dose of each, which turns out to be like it's a pretty significant dose of magnesium. If they're really low in magnesium and they're reporting like quite a lot of like brain fog and or have a scenario like, and this is a lot of people, but have something where they're really like their brain power is particularly demanding, whether it's their job, usually it's their job, or something about their life says this person really needs to be on point mentally. What athletes is one like that have if somebody's like the quarterback of a football team or really any athletic sport that during the game is actually really cognitively demanding work. And I think a lot of times athletes aren't really given enough credit for that, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of instantaneous real time, many times crossing over into that subconscious, like automatic thinking and reacting and pivoting. And you do that constantly for a period of whatever the game is, an hour to 3 hours, depending. Significant cognitive strain. And so there are a few different things that we'll do to optimize mental, basically brain chemistry is the category that we refer to it. And that's an example, right? If somebody's either low or even, or not even up, but if they're suboptimal in magnesium, then the 3 and 8 one is one that will include in a protocol.
Cool. Yeah, that's just one that I've been hearing a little bit more about.
Mhm.
Just been seeing a little bit more research around that one
Mhm.
particular. Real quick before we dive into, because I do want to talk to you about metabolic health, and I feel like it ties into
Sure.
what we've been chatting about.
Yeah, man.
You said you were in Missouri for a little bit. Where at Missouri? I'm from St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh yeah, I was at Mizzou, Columbia.
Oh, okay, cool, awesome.
Yeah,
Huh?
it was I was there when they made that transition.
Okay.
And it was like 2012 or so. God, it seems that's a long damn time ago. And I remember Georgia came and played Missouri, and my sister came up for that game, and that was super cool. We were like,
Football.
yeah, and we were some of the only people wearing our the red Georgia gear. No, that was super cool.
Yep. I think Georgia got Mizzou this year pretty good, if I remember correctly. I'm not super into it, but I think they got them pretty good
Yeah,
this year.
I think so. Yeah, I'm not actually for a guy that's got 2 degrees from there and was on faculty there. I'm not a huge college or huge football fan. I do like college football probably more than professional football, but man, I'm a big, when it comes to sports, like I'm not big on the traditional spectator sports. I mostly like to watch sports that either I have participated myself and I just never played football, or something that you just don't see every day. So like when the Olympics come on every 4 years, or I
Yep.
guess it's every two, like the summer and winter Olympics, I'm like super into it because I just like learning about to me, relatively new sports or less common ones. So anyway, yeah, that's all that to say. I don't watch a ton of football in the fall, although it's fun. Like I'll go to buddies' houses and watch the game all day, hang out,
So yeah,
have a couple beers.
yeah,
Yeah,
fun thing to do on a Saturday. I'm the
yeah,
same. I don't really watch any college football either. That's why I was like, I think they play each other. I don't know for sure. So
100%. They do. If they don't play every year, they play most years. That's for
yeah.
sure.
Yep. Cool. One thing I want to chat with you about is just metabolic health and how our
Mm.
kind of our cardiovascular system can improve or impact this. I think the first thing I want to go into is just so the audience kind of knows how do you define metabolic health? Because I feel like it's just not a buzzword,
Yeah.
but I just feel people define it differently. Yeah. What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, it can mean many different things. Metabolism is an unbelievably broad term and an unbelievably broad concept. For me, this is just my own personal bias. This is not by any way, shape, or form suggesting that it's like a great way to singularly think about it. For me, it does come back to, we talk about like our glycemic control is a big part of it. Also, here's how I'll answer that. I really actually do the concept of metabolic flexibility. We did some experiments on it and studied it, and there's a few different definitions of it. But my working definition of metabolic flexibility is that your body uses the correct fuel source or substrate, as we call it in the academic term for it, but it uses the correct fuel source for the job. For the demand that's being placed on the system. So we should be able to use carbohydrates when we need to. We should be able to use fats when we need to, and we should be able to switch between those very readily. That is to me that flexibility aspect of it. And so people who are better able to switch from one to the other based on changes it's basically the change is typically metabolic demand. So like the start of exercise or sudden need for fuel in a crisis scenario, you're being chased by a tiger in the woods or something, then you can tap into this carbohydrate source so that you can run the hell away from the threat. Anyway, that's one part of it. And yeah, but it turns out people who are metabolically inflexible, who are not able to switch well, or who are, for it could be any number of reasons, but are largely dominant on one type of fuel source or the other, then you're less metabolically flexible, and that's less metabolically healthy. And then oh yeah, I could probably stop there. Go in any direction you want, but yeah, that is a working definition of metabolic health, and there are connections to the cardiovascular system as well, which I know is part of your question. But
Yeah, real quick before we go into the cardiovascular side of things, how would somebody know if they're metabolically inflexible?
yeah, there's not a great like real day to day type of like real world way of looking at that without some sort of like special equipment. But
Let me ask it this way.
yeah,
Could somebody be in like quote unquote good shape and look good and like still not necessarily be metabolically flexible?
yes. But more common is that you're not in as good a shape as you want. If body composition is a big one, a well-fueled body and one that is metabolically flexible, that is well conditioned for various types of tasks, whether it be it strength or endurance or some sort of sprint interval type thing, where where my mind was going with the ability to recover from exercise is a good readout for metabolic flexibility. So anyway, like coming back to something that is if somebody knows that they're metabolic flexible or not. Typically, if your body composition is not where you want it to be, you're not probably not as metabolically flexible as you could be. So like for just to throw some numbers, like 12 to 15, this is the classic 12 to 15% body fat for a guy, probably 20, around 20% for ladies, maybe a little bit more, 22, 20, 24, up to 24%, I would say. Start getting above those ranges, then we're starting to see some deconditioning, and that is linked to less metabolic flexibility. But again, the practical way to look at that, or to see, so maybe assess that if you want to apply this to something that might be meaningful for your audience, is how are you performing in your workouts and how are you recovering from them even during the workout? How are you sustaining? Because something like, I don't know how much of your audience is in particular a CrossFit or like functional fitness type audience, but you're nodding, so maybe quite a bit, right?
I would say
Uh,
a little bit, or at least into
uh,
it, right?
Sure. Okay. If you're we just and so if you're doing the CrossFit Open, we just did the 25.1, right? It's a 15-minute workout where if you're getting 6 minutes into that workout and you're just thinking like there's just no way I can keep this output going, and you cannot settle into a steady state of like just consistently moving through and not taking forever staring at the stupid dumbbell before you get back to it. That's Then you're doing the right thing by the stimulus of the workout itself is going to help you. But there's potentially like a nutrition issue there, whether you're suboptimally fueled for the task, and linked to that chronically is body composition is probably suboptimal from where it could be for that. You have substantial enough, there's sufficient rather muscle mass to do the movements, lift the loads and all that stuff. But you also need to be lean enough to and cardiovascularly conditioned enough such that you can continue to move. And even as the workout is progressing, to recover a bit during it, take 3 breaths and then be able to get back to work. Metabolic inflexibility is something where the application there is you're just so it's a that when you're crashing in a workout like that, the reliance on carbohydrate for that task is so great that the metabolic byproducts of very high rates of carbohydrate metabolism. That is, so the nerds out there, the anaerobic glycolysis that we're doing is so disproportionately high that the fatigue, it's just inevitable and you just can't sustain it. You've got to stay, like the body just will not let you continue when you're standing there, like I said, staring at the dumbbell or laying down the ground in the middle of your burpees and whatnot. I guess as I'm sitting here thinking about metabolic flexibility, is just I'm interested in it. I think it's cool, but it's not as like practical in its applicability for the everyday person as much as it's very much, and these things are all linked together. Like it's very much linked to like sufficient aerobic conditioning and all that stuff too. The more aerobically conditioned you are, the better your body composition to hit these basics, right? And then you can accomplish the whole metabolic flexibility thing.
So I guess then what is kind of, I don't know if you hit on it there, but what kind of is that tie-in with the cardiovascular system? And do people try to separate this, or what do you commonly see there with that?
Yeah, man. Trying to think of the best direction to go with this, but we can talk about in terms of optimal physiology, optimal health. The better condition we are on the whole, the more dialed in our cardiovascular system is, and that from a performance standpoint, that means optimal delivery of oxygen to the working muscles to match the demand, or at least try to match the metabolic demand. If it's high intensity, you're not ever going to fully match it. That's why it hurts. If it's fully matched right now when we're sitting here, literally sitting here, right? And it's we're doing mostly aerobic metabolism right now, and plenty of fat metabolism since we're sitting. That's the low level activity daily living. But by shoring up our aerobic fitness, then it becomes like just our activity. I like to think about this too. We don't want our activities of daily living, like the non-workout activities, that's the yard work or playing with our kids and that sort of thing. You want that to be like your zone two stuff, if you will. And by having a solid fitness base, we're not living at a really high percentage of our max capacity and being gassed all the time just by doing those basic things. That's how I think of those things that connect. We want to we increase our cardio so that we're more, there's a word again, resilient to the demands of daily life and things that can and should be fun, remains. And the less conditioned we are, the more metabolically inflexible, if you like, we are, the harder those things become. And then the less we want to do them. And then the human nature is to actually not just less we want to do them, but actually do them less, right? And so that's not good. That's what we want to avoid.
So I guess types of training, right? How is this going to impact it? Do you think that like a mixed approach is going to be the way to go, or what do you typically
I
recommend
do.
here?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I got into CrossFit as a personal experiment like 10 years ago now. I was a typical stereotypical skeptic academic. I thought it was stupid at first. Like that's the thing I was to say, that's the thing where they like climb the ropes and flip tires and hurt themselves. And then that was like, I had that mindset, but I was also like curious about it too. So I thought about doing CrossFit for about 6 months before I actually did it. And so the year from January 1, 2015, throughout that whole year was my 1 year experiment to see how it would go. And it stuck. And then I would zoom that out. And I'm not that super loyal to the CrossFit brand, so I don't mean to sit here and be a fanboy in that regard by any stretch. But the general type of training where you're lifting heavy stuff and you're getting your heart rate up and breathing hard and moving your body, doing what's the whole thing is high intensity and functional movements and changing it up. There's constantly variance, I think is the term that's in there too. All of those things hit most of the bases from a physiological standpoint. That's why like I actually see the methodology and I agree with it 100% in that regard. I mean, there's not really any question about the results that that gives with when applied consistently. That being said, I also on a personal, I think listeners might appreciate this on a personal level. There's more to it. Like from a muscular development standpoint, I do believe that some hypertrophy bodybuilding type of training is in addition to CrossFit, or maybe sometimes instead of whatever, because we all have only a certain amount of time. I think that's ideal to include as well to really develop. Again, going back to the body composition is a really important health metric. Tends to be that when you get your body composition dialed in, then a lot of other things do fall into place as well. Not everything. It can, something like these micronutrient levels, if they're fucked up, then that can happen in a lean, great looking person with six pack abs and all that stuff. But anyway, so that's just definitely some additional weight training. And I find a lot of benefit in additional aerobic conditioning for longer time durations outside of CrossFit as well, just for the nature of it being a 1 hour class most of the time. And most programming follows that strength followed by Metcon model. You're going to be just by time constraints limited to most of the time 15 to 20, maybe 25-minute workouts most of the time, and getting a little bit longer doses in there from a cardiovascular conditioning standpoint is maybe a little bit more optimal. And so my personal approach is 5 to 6 days a week of CrossFit. And then additionally, I'll take probably 3 to 5 days. Outside of that, I've been training for the last year to try to get really fast at 5Ks and 10Ks. People are like, aren't you just going to do a half marathon and then a marathon? I was like, no, I don't want to specialize that much. And I don't want to, I'm very blessed. I do have a good bit of time to train the way I want to most of the time. But that has helped multiple things in terms of both performance. I think running is, I think for me and for a lot of people, it's harder than CrossFit, I think, for me at this point, for how long I've been doing CrossFit and how long I have not as much been doing running. It's just like more. And so doing those hard, like really hard, grueling, like intervals, like track style workouts has like really awesome, like mental health benefits, like doing hard shit and getting through a workout you don't even think you're going to make it through. It's got multiple ripple effects. And then I also get in probably 2 to 3 like hypertrophy style bro lifting type sessions a week. A, because they're fun. B, again, because I think it's best to do that kind of training. That is the most optimal stimulus for muscular development, and that has good effects on body composition. Now, every time I run through all that with people, it's like the average person doesn't have the time to do 10 training sessions in a week. It's in my mind is very much tied to my job, like put clients through some really grueling stuff, and I'm never going to be a coach that doesn't do the same stuff that I'm going to ask people to do. And I might have different types of clients, so I need to be doing like the type, like whatever it is that I might apply to somebody, I need to be doing it all so that I have like a library to pick from. But yeah, just to answer the question, like what is the overall goal is to hit on all the different things, right? As much as you can. Aerobic capacity, body composition. I think one of the things I really like about CrossFit / functional fitness is it does promote a general athleticism. And the cliche thing that you hear from the CrossFit stuff is like being prepared for the unknown and unknowable. But I think it covers it well. Like anytime I want to play, like I pick up, like in the last year, I picked up pickleball a little bit. Who hasn't, right? And there's a carry or transfer of what is it, 90 something different movements in CrossFit. You become skilled at picking up new skills by training that way. And so when you pick up something new, like a new sport, a new game, I think you get it a little bit quicker and it's fun. It's not discouraging. Like I suck at pickleball 1000%, but it's fun to suck at stuff and then do it for a little bit and then get better at it. So anyway, man, I feel like I'm rambling, but how should people, I think I'll end the weaving thoughts with this is I also do believe that this is me wearing like a coaching hat for a moment is, all right, if I only have one or two things, like if I only have time or interest really, because not everybody's in the coaching space like you and I, but just general fitness enthusiasts, pick something that you're bad at. And like whatever, if you're typically like the guy that's, or lady, that I like to think of as like hiding behind the heavy weights, go heavier in a Metcon so that you go slower. If that's your natural tendency, then go lighter and try to get more reps and get your heart rate up and make it a cardio stimulus. That will, but still do the kind of stuff that you like. That will, whatever it is, addressing that weak point in your game will shore up. If you think of fitness as like this overall thing that we're trying to, the house that we're trying to build, right? These are all really important elements of the foundation of the house. So we got to work on them all. So whatever's the weakest point, that to me is the one to start with. At least that's how I think about it.
So with the Metcons and like the CrossFit, what would you consider the stimulus to be from that? Does that make sense when I'm asking? Like, what's the typical like stimulus of CrossFit? Is it like you said, it just all round fitness, or does it
It's
depend on the
definitely all
workout?
right. Yeah, every workout is a little bit different and biased a certain way, but the whole concept is GPP, general physical preparedness. Touch on it all. And yeah, there's, like I said a minute ago, I think bodybuilding type training is best for promoting muscle growth, but you get plenty of people who do CrossFit and nothing else, and they've definitely got plenty of musculature from high rep, low to moderate loading. You'll get some stimulus in that regard. Yeah, it hits that. And then because it's definitely, and it's as implied in the name, metabolic conditioning, you get a aerobic benefit from it. And that the time domain for most CrossFit workouts is pretty much spot on for developing or some measure of aerobic capacity or some degree of aerobic capacity, from, call it from 8 to 10 minutes on the shorter end for most workouts to 20 to 25 minutes on the longer end. Again, from Venn diagram of it all, 15 to 20 minutes seems to be about the norm. I don't know. Just every gym's a little bit different, but yeah. And then there's the neurological component from all the different skills that are demanded in CrossFit. So ranging from things like getting your double unders, right? That's like I would say a medium level skill. It could be a high level skill depending on your background, where you're coming from with it, to really sophisticated things like handstand walks, which is minor trash. Even 10 years in, I could get by if it's not too far, but and you're doing that under high heart rate. So it's a blend of it all. It's a multiple and varied kind of capacity. And yeah, and I lift, like I said, lifting heavy stuff, sometimes under a high heart rate, blending things like heavy deadlifts and running. It's unbelievably simple, but profound to develop like this kind of really general capacity. And then again, people shit on it, and maybe well, rightfully or not, I don't really care. But the criticism is almost always boiled down to, yeah, but you're not going to get as fill in the blank superlative as you could. And yeah, that's exactly the point. You're going to get some capacity. You're becoming basically a jack of all trades. Yeah, and I've selected a few things, like again, the muscular hypertrophy development and the aerobic conditioning for something longer than 15 to 20 minutes as things to focus on more outside of just training in the CrossFit gym for me, because those are some specialties that I would like to have as part of my own fitness routine. But yeah, the stimulus is broad for sure, for sure.
So it sounds like for you, it's like you're going to get that broad stimulus from the CrossFit. And then if there are
Mm.
certain areas that you want to improve, right,
Yep.
you'd spend a little bit more time doing it, right? So in your
Yeah.
case, it's, hey, body composition is important. I'm going to do more hypertrophy style training, add in a little bit more of that, get that stimulus. And then, hey, aerobics style training
Yeah.
is important to me. So I'm going to add in a little bit more of that. So it kind of gives you those options to branch out a little bit if you want to and become a little bit more specialized in those.
That's exactly that's been like the last couple of years for me, 2 to 3 years.
So what's the recovery like? Again, like
Yeah,
we
dude.
said, for somebody, again, that has a normal life, I'm assuming, again, you
Yeah.
have to titrate that to their recovery.
Hmm.
But for somebody
Hmm.
like you, it's like you're super into this, the nutrition around it. How much goes into that side of things?
It's huge. Yeah. First of all, adequate fueling. You got to get the basics, or protein intake, carbohydrate intake are really critical from a muscle growth, repair, recovery, etc. standpoint, and fueling standpoint. The two biggest factors are protein and carbohydrate from a macros standpoint. Fats too, for sure. Not burning through a lot of, yeah, your primary substrate, your primary fuel source for this kind of training is definitely carbohydrate. But then overall, caloric intake is the most important parameter for maintaining body composition. So they all three, for sure, fats, carbohydrates, and proteins factor in for sure. But as far as like recovery, biggest thing by far, the most important is going to be sleep.
Yeah.
And in terms of overall health too, I always say you got 3 big pillars, right? You got sleep, nutrition, and training. And I go back and forth with which is more important, sleep
Yeah,
and
no, it's
nutrition. I actually think if I had to pick one, it'd be sleep, and then but nutrition being a very close second, and then training is a very distant third. Very distant. And this is because the exercise, like, what's my background? Like, I'm the exercise physiologist since the early 2000s. If I could go back to say when I was in undergrad, just getting into the field. That's been my focus. But then for a long time, sticking my head in the sand about nutrition, and then finally had a come to Jesus moment about gotta get my diet dialed in if I'm going to
yep.
really perform well. And then in the last couple of years, since having my son, it truly is where I've gotten more serious about sleep. Really, it was last year, 2024, that was like made a concerted effort to actually address deficiencies in sleep. And I'm still not great at it. I need to get better. If I have one thing, like if I had to pick one thing in my overall health regimen to continue working on, it's absolutely sleep. Just because I don't know why. I just stuck at going to bed sometimes. I always stay up too
Stuff.
late. Yeah, like after my son's like completely wrecked the house. And for a guy, especially for a guy, I'm a neat freak. So like, don't like to go to bed with a dirty house. I'll easily stay up till 11 o'clock or later cleaning up the place. Or there's always something I can be thinking about doing the next day. I don't really
Yep.
unless it's for a good conversation like this. I don't really sit still very well. If like when I'm doing emails and work stuff, I have to get up multiple times. But anyway, sleep. Since I've started really, like I said, I got a Garmin watch. I don't have it on right now. I'm trying my watch. But pick your wearable. There's a lot of pros and cons with wearables, but the ability to pay attention, give you something to pay attention to sleep, whether that's sleep score. People can argue and get all super academic about whether it's accurate or not. Who gives a shit? The fact is, you're paying attention to it. You're monitoring it. And once I saw even just like, not even the scores, it's just like how many hours a night. I was shocked that I thought I was getting like 7.5. No, when I first started wearing the stupid thing, which I bought for training, I was shocked when it was like, yeah, you actually only sleep for 5 or 5.5 hours. Like, oh my gosh. And
It
so then I'm like, all right, what do I need to do? I need to expect that's unacceptable. And so now I'd have to look, man, but I feel like I'm averaging in between 7.5 and 8, which is for me pretty amazing. But the quality could always be better. Habits around sleep could always be better. I do have it shouldn't, but I'll just admit it. I'm not perfect. I've got my phone right by my bed. Shouldn't do that. But my son's on the monitor and I look at it. And so
make sure.
that's my excuse.
It's funny you say that about sleep. I think that's a good point you bring up, right? Because it's similar to with calories, right? People are gonna underestimate the amount of calories they're
Oh,
gonna consume. So it's like sleep. That's a good one where you're like, hey, we're probably gonna overestimate how much we're sleeping, right? It's just a natural tendency to do something like
100%.
that.
I've never even thought about that analogy. That's a really good comparison. Absolutely. You ask somebody how they eat, they usually say, yeah, pretty good. And then they way classically underreport their actual consumption. If I were to, I'm sure somebody's thought of this and looked at it before, but I haven't really thought of it in this way. But yeah, if you ask somebody how their sleep is, they probably way overestimate the number of hours that they're getting, even if they will fully admit that their energy levels are low and they sleep like shit. It's probably worse than you think if you haven't looked at it,
Oh
for
yeah.
sure.
And that's why what you were saying there makes sense about how a lot of people are going to poo-poo on the science behind the sleep, but it can be a good thing to just like you said, you're monitoring it now and you're aware of it, and that's going to be
Yeah.
super helpful.
Yeah. I would say I probably stuck my head in the sand about that for a long time, for sure. And then just having the watch tell me, and like Garmin has the body battery feature. And I don't know I think it's based on, I do know it's based on HRV, but like it pretty well tracks with when I get that thing up to closer to 100% versus 70, 80, even on the 50, 60 sometimes if I push the training a little too hard. And if I push the training hard, if I are slacking on the sleep thing and they're staying up too late, and if it's like going back to the football thing, like if I'm spend the afternoon drinking with my buddies, which I don't do very often at all, but that's when I've seen my all those metrics absolutely tank is with
Yep.
alcohol.
Yep.
Yeah. It's oh no shit. I feel like shit. This thing says I should feel like shit. It's doing something right. Like it's
Yep.
tracking something accurately. It turns out that HRV is pretty well linked to that, to all that kind of stuff. Anyway, yeah, but a lot, like I think back to before I paid any attention to it, it's like I had no idea. I had no idea.
Especially for somebody like you that is so active, it's like everyone needs to pay attention to it. But I feel like the more active you are, like you are, it's like you probably really want to pay attention to some of those recovery
Absolutely.
metrics
Yeah.
at that point, because that's going to allow you to do more and have better quality work as well too.
Mhm.
So cool, man. Again, I want to be respectful of your time. Super fun chat with you. I felt like
Yeah.
we just tipped the surface there on metabolic health and everything. And again, I think
Yeah.
that everything flowed really well. I guess on your end, is there anything coming out on your end that you want to let the audience know about, and then where can they find you?
I'm mostly in this new role is like behind the scenes. So I don't you might not see too much necessarily directly from me. Definitely go check out you can find me on Instagram. I'm Dr. Nathan Jenkins on Instagram. Feel free to connect there. If people have general questions, my DMs I get questions about stuff like all the time. Usually after I'm on a show like this, somebody will follow up. That's fine. I'll help if and how I can. I'm not currently taking clients, so like I'm not here to promote any of that. I just hope this was like valuable for you and for your audience for sure. And then yeah, if you're curious about what we have going on over at Rapid, it's the new Instagram is actually called, I think it's called Arate Performance Lab. And if you look up just the barbell shrugged, you'll find it there too. And that has to do with a little bit of rebranding that was done, I guess, at the beginning of the year with the program that we're rolling out now. I'll defer to my bosses to focus in on that. But yeah, check out the barbell shrug podcast as well, and you'll hear about the different things going on with the company. And I'm a big part of that. Again, mostly behind the scenes, you won't hear me talked about that much. But anyway, yeah, that's where I'm at most these days.
Man, yeah, no, a ton of great information in here. I'd love to have you back on again in the future. And
Sure.
yeah, we'll make
Yeah.
sure that we link all that stuff in the show notes so people can find out more about you. And again, follow up with any questions they have on price supplements. I feel like that would be the biggest one that people end up at. You probably
Yeah.
usually ask. But again,
Yeah.
Nathan, really appreciate your time, man. And we'll chat with you next time.
Of course, man. Thank you.